September 15, 1940. Within the Prime Minister's official residence in Tokyo, Japan, a heavy pall of cigarette smoke saturated the air as Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto decisively crushed his third lucky strike of the meeting. The American tobacco a subtle biting irony that registered with every man in the room. Prince Fumimaro Konoe, the Prime Minister, had posed the question with uncharacteristic bluntness, slicing through the delicate layers of Japanese diplomatic custom. If we choose the path of war with America, what truly are our prospects? The answer Yamamoto delivered would echo through the halls of the Japanese Empire, a chilling ghost of a prophecy that would haunt it to its final agonizing breath. If I am commanded to fight, irrespective of the ultimate outcome, I shall unleash a storm of fury for the first 6 months, perhaps even a year, but for the second or third year, I possess absolutely no confidence whatsoever. A palpable discomfort rippled through the other military officials present. Here was the commander-in-chief of their combined fleet, the very man destined to lead any conflict against the United States, effectively forecasting Japan's demise before a single shot had been fired. What they failed to fully comprehend was that Yamamoto was not engaging in speculation. He had stood as a direct witness to the sheer earth-shaking power of American manufacturing. He had walked the floors of its sprawling factories, surveyed its seemingly endless oil fields, and calculated its productive capability down to the final rivet. The cold, hard mathematics of destruction had been worked out years before in the quiet lecture halls of Harvard, confirmed in the roaring steel mills of Pennsylvania, and verified amidst the infinite forest of oil derricks piercing the Texas soil. Yamamoto harbored a knowledge his colleagues were unwilling to accept. Japan had already lost any conceivable war with America before it ever began. The sole remaining variable was time, a mere 6 months. He would grant them half a year of dazzling victories before the industrial colossus across the ocean would be fully, terrifyingly awake. Isoroku Takano entered the world on April 4, 1884, in Nagaoka, a modest city in the Niigata prefecture, born the 6th son to a schoolteacher mired in poverty. His father's age at his birth, 56, inspired his name Isoroku, which translates to 56 in Japanese. The family's financial hardship was an oppressive, crushing weight. They frequently subsisted on a meager diet of sweet potatoes and barley, the staple of rice a luxury they could not afford. This early experience with scarcity would later cast his observations of America's staggering abundance into even sharper, more startling relief. In 1916, the young naval officer was embraced by the Yamamoto family through adoption, a conventional method for social advancement in Japanese society. By that time, he had already sacrificed 2 fingers on his left hand to the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, where he had witnessed firsthand Japan's breathtaking victory over Russia's Baltic Fleet. That singular triumph had instilled in many Japanese a fervent belief that spiritual superiority could conquer any material deficit, a dangerous delusion Yamamoto would dedicate his life to dispelling. The Tsushima veteran perceived a truth his contemporaries had overlooked. Japan's victory over Russia was only achievable because Russia was forced to project its power across thousands of miles, while simultaneously grappling with a revolution on its home front. America would be burdened by no such handicaps. Yet, to grasp this fundamental truth completely, Yamamoto had to immerse himself in America directly. His first true look came in 1919 when, as a 35-year-old commander, he was issued orders that would alter not only the trajectory of his own life, but the very course of history. Report to Harvard University for English Language Studies and observe the latest in American naval developments. What unfolded in the following months would metamorphose a devoted Japanese patriot into a modern-day Cassandra, a prophet fated to speak of a doom that no one would believe. In April of 1919, Yamamoto stepped onto the grounds of Harvard, a striking figure carrying 2 swords and clad in his full naval uniform, an object of immense curiosity amidst the ivy-draped architecture of Cambridge. He registered as a special student, with the official purpose of mastering English. His final transcript would reveal a less-than-stellar C+ in the language course, but this simple grade masked the profound alternative education that was truly taking place. Residing in humble lodgings in Brookline, Massachusetts, Yamamoto adopted a routine that would have appeared obsessive to any onlooker. He survived on just 3 to 4 hours of sleep each night, dedicating every remaining moment to devouring any text he could find on American industry, petroleum production, and the burgeoning field of aviation. His room transformed into a chaotic sanctuary of knowledge, overflowing with maps of oil fields, statistical summaries of American manufacturing, and technical journals detailing the intricacies of steel production. The future, as Yamamoto was witnessing it, was to be fueled by oil. While his fellow Japanese students, numbering around 70 at Harvard during his tenure, dutifully attended their formal classes, Yamamoto spent countless hours sequestered in Harvard's Widener Library, meticulously researching petroleum geology and refining capacities. He unearthed a staggering fact. America was responsible for 65% of the world's oil production, churning out 378 million barrels in 1919 alone. Japan, in stark contrast, was forced to import nearly every single drop, with the majority of it coming from America itself. The true unfiltered education, however, occurred during Harvard's summer recesses. Yamamoto would vanish for weeks at a time, traversing the vast American landscape by hitchhiking, with little more than a handful of dollars in his pocket. His inaugural major journey led him to the oil fields of Texas, where he immersed himself for 3 weeks, studying extraction techniques and refinery operations. He sustained himself on a Spartan diet of bread, bananas, and water, finding sleep in open fields and rustic barns, all to conserve his meager funds for more prolonged periods of observation. By the summer of 1920, Yamamoto found himself standing outside the Ford Highland Park plant in Detroit, a silent observer watching the monumental shift change. A torrent of 20,000 workers poured out from the factory gates, the majority of them walking to their own private automobiles, a spectacle that would have been utterly inconceivable in Japan, where even high-ranking military officers seldom owned a car. He had hitchhiked 900 miles from Cambridge just to witness what Henry Ford famously termed the liberation of the common man. Once inside the plant, which Yamamoto gained access to by posing as a visiting engineering student, he beheld the assembly line that had utterly transformed the world of manufacturing. A new Model T was completed and rolled off the line every 45 seconds. Each worker executed a single repetitive action with machine-like precision and timing. The entire journey from raw steel to a finished automobile was accomplished in a mere 93 minutes. During his week in Detroit, Yamamoto filled 3 entire notebooks with his observations. He calculated that the Ford Motor Company alone employed more industrial workers than the entire Japanese Navy. The company's daily consumption of steel surpassed Japan's weekly production. Most unsettling of all was the realization that this was just a single company, in a single city, within a single industry. "The Americans have elevated manufacturing to a science," he penned in a letter to his mentor, Admiral Tomasaburo Kato. "They produce machines in the same way we produce rice, systematically, efficiently, and in quantities that beggar the imagination. Each worker is a specialist. Each process is meticulously measured. Each improvement is integrated without delay. There is no waste, no hesitation, no inefficiency." The figures were simply mind-boggling. American automobile production had skyrocketed from 485,000 vehicles in 1915 to 2.3 million by 1920. At the time of Yamamoto's visit, there was 1 car for every 13 people in America. In Japan, that ratio was a stark one for every 5,000. Yet Yamamoto perceived something far deeper than the raw numbers. He understood that mass automobile production directly translated to mass production capability for military hardware. Those very assembly lines churning out Model Ts could, with startling ease, be converted to produce military trucks, tanks, and aircraft engines. The workers, already skilled in precision manufacturing, could readily build weapons. The vast, intricate supply chains that delivered parts to Detroit could just as efficiently deliver ammunition to the front lines of a battlefield. Yamamoto's most ambitious, unauthorized expedition took him deep into the heart of Texas during the summer of 1921, shortly before his graduation from Harvard. He disappeared for a full 6 weeks, sparking minor diplomatic ripples when he failed to appear at several official functions. He had journeyed to observe what he termed the fountains of power, the sprawling oil fields of East Texas. Traveling by freight train and on foot, Yamamoto finally reached the legendary Spindletop Field near Beaumont, the very birthplace of the modern oil industry in 1901. Although it was past its prime, the field was still gushing forth thousands of barrels of oil each day. Yamamoto spent his days conversing with roughnecks and engineers, absorbing knowledge about drilling techniques, extraction rates, and refining processes. The sheer scale of the operation was beyond Japanese comprehension. A single well could produce more oil in a single day than Japan imported in an entire week. The Texaco refinery at Port Arthur, which Yamamoto meticulously sketched in his notes, processed an astonishing 100,000 barrels daily. The entire facility was powered by electricity, with automated pumps and electric lights that allowed it to operate 24 hours a day. "Oil is the very lifeblood of modern warfare," Yamamoto inscribed in his journal. "Ships, planes, tanks, trucks, they all drink oil. America possesses oceans of it just beneath their soil. Japan has none. This one, solitary fact, dictates everything." He ventured north to the newly discovered fields in Kilgore and Longview, witnessing firsthand the boom that would establish East Texas as the world's preeminent oil producer. Derricks shot up like metallic forests, so densely packed that workers could literally walk from one to another without ever touching the ground. Natural gas, dismissed as a mere waste product, was burned off in massive flares that illuminated the night sky for miles around. This casual wastefulness struck Yamamoto with particular force. Japan painstakingly conserved every drop of its imported fuel, while here, Americans were daily burning off enough natural gas to power the entire city of Tokyo for a month. This effortless, almost thoughtless abundance, more than any display of military might, convinced him of America's ultimate invincibility. In January 1926, Yamamoto made his return to America, this time as Japan's naval attaché in Washington, holding the rank of captain. This posting, which extended until March 1928, would serve to confirm every single fear that his years at Harvard had instilled in him. Now, armed with diplomatic immunity and a proper budget, he could travel without restriction and observe events officially. His foremost priority was to update his intelligence on American industry. In his absence, American production had not just grown, it had exploded. Automobile manufacturing was on a trajectory to hit 4.3 million vehicles by 1926. Steel production had reached 48 million tons. Oil production had surged past 770 million barrels. The numbers were no longer just increasing, they were accelerating at a terrifying rate. Yamamoto quickly fell into a routine of systematic observation. From Monday to Wednesday, he fulfilled his duties at the embassy, attending naval conferences and diplomatic gatherings. From Thursday to Sunday, he was on the road, his focus always laser-sharp and unchanging. Production capability, resource extraction, and technological advancement. His journeys took him to the Bethlehem Steel Plant in Pennsylvania, where he witnessed the forging of naval armor plate. The facility's electric furnaces could create in hours the kind of specialized steel that took Japanese foundries weeks to manufacture. The plant employed 30,000 workers and consumed more electricity than the entire city of Kyoto. In Birmingham, Alabama, he delved into the iron ore supply chain that was the backbone of American steel production. Trains arrived every hour, laden with ore from Minnesota's Mesabi Range, coal from Pennsylvania, and limestone from Indiana. The seamless integration and efficiency of this supply chain left him in awe. Materials traveled thousands of miles with the precision of a clock, all coordinated by telegraph and telephone networks that Japan simply could not replicate. During his tenure in Washington, Yamamoto became renowned for his poker games. Every Friday night, he hosted these games in his apartment, extending invitations to American naval officers, diplomats, and intelligence officials. These gatherings were far from mere social events. They were meticulously planned intelligence operations conducted over a backdrop of cards and whiskey. Captain Ellis Zacharias of Naval Intelligence became a frequent attendee. Decades later, in his 1946 memoir Secret Missions, Zacharias would disclose that these games were exercises in careful probing from both sides. As they bluffed over their card hands, the players engaged in subtle interrogations about naval doctrine, ship capabilities, and strategic philosophies. Yamamoto was brilliant at poker, Zacharias remembered. He could recall every card that had been played, calculate odds in an instant, and read faces as if they were open books. But more crucially, he utilized the games to comprehend the American psyche. He wanted to understand how Americans thought, how they reached decisions, how they behaved under pressure. The poker games unveiled something vital to Yamamoto. Americans were inherent risk-takers who could comfortably afford to lose. They wagered aggressively because their pockets were deep. They could sustain losses and simply keep playing. This mentality, Yamamoto came to realize, was a direct reflection of their national strategy. America could afford to lose battles, even entire campaigns, and continue the fight. Japan, with its finite resources, could not endure a single major defeat. One evening in February 1926, after raking in a significant pot, Yamamoto made a remark that Zacharias would never forget. In poker and in war, the player with the most chips can afford to wait for the right cards. Japan is playing with borrowed chips against a player who owns the bank. Yamamoto's most profound strategic insight during his years in America revolved around aviation. While the majority of naval officers still conceived of warfare in terms of massive battleships, Yamamoto understood that aircraft would be the decisive factor in future naval conflicts, and America was perfectly positioned to dominate this new dimension of warfare. He paid a visit to the Glenn L. Martin Company in Cleveland, Ohio, where aircraft were being mass-produced using assembly techniques borrowed from the automobile industry. Workers who, prior to their training, had never even seen an airplane could construct complex aircraft in a matter of weeks. The factory was turning out 6 planes a day, with electric tools and powered conveyors accelerating the production process. At McCook Field in Dayton, Ohio, the forerunner to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Yamamoto observed American aviation research at its cutting edge. The facility employed more aeronautical engineers than existed in the entirety of Japan. They possessed wind tunnels, engine testing facilities, and materials laboratories that Japanese aviation could only dream of. The numbers alone told the story. In 1926, American aircraft manufacturers produced 1,186 military aircraft and 5,189 civilian planes. American airlines were already transporting mail and passengers on regular schedules that crisscrossed the continent. Japan, by contrast, struggled to produce 200 aircraft a year, mostly relying on imported engines and instruments. The Americans think in 3 dimensions, Yamamoto noted in a report dispatched to Tokyo. While we are busy perfecting our battleships, they are constructing the entire infrastructure for aerial warfare. They have the aluminum production, the engine technology, and, most critically, the production capacity to build aircraft by the tens of thousands. His warnings fell largely on deaf ears. The Japanese Navy remained fixated on battleships, meticulously planning for a decisive surface battle that Yamamoto knew with certainty would never happen. Aircraft carriers were still viewed as auxiliary vessels, useful for reconnaissance, but not as decisive weapons of war. Yamamoto's most comprehensive tour of American industry occurred in the summer of 1926. Leveraging his diplomatic status and the connections he had carefully cultivated, he secured visits to facilities that most foreigners were never permitted to see. Each visit added more data points to his ever-growing calculation of America's unassailable strength. At the River Rouge complex in Dearborn, Michigan, Yamamoto witnessed the complete seamless integration of American manufacturing might. The facility, sprawling over 2,000 acres, was a self-contained city. Iron ore arrived by ship, coal by train, and rubber from Firestone plantations in Liberia. Every single process, from the smelting of steel to the final assembly, took place on site. The complex was a hive of 100,000 workers and had its own power plant that generated 400,000 horsepower of electricity. The sheer scale of it overwhelmed even Yamamoto's detailed preparations. He had studied the statistics, but to experience the reality was a different matter entirely. Blast furnaces that stood stories tall operated without pause. Assembly lines snaked for miles. The parking lots held 25,000 workers' cars, more automobiles than existed in most Japanese cities. At Standard Oil's Bayway refinery in New Jersey, Yamamoto observed petroleum refining on an industrial epic scale. The facility processed 100,000 barrels of crude oil daily, yielding not just fuel but hundreds of petroleum byproducts, from lubricants to chemicals. The catalytic cracking towers, invented only a few years prior, could extract twice the amount of gasoline from crude oil compared to Japanese refineries. They have solved the equation of modern war, Yamamoto recorded. Unlimited raw materials plus unlimited production capacity plus unlimited innovation equals inevitable victory. Japan possesses none of these advantages. In late 1926, Yamamoto journeyed to California, ostensibly for a naval conference in San Francisco, but with the true purpose of evaluating America's capabilities in the Pacific. What he discovered was a coastline being rapidly transformed into an impregnable fortress of industrial power. The Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo could construct and repair capital ships simultaneously. The facility's electrical capacity alone surpassed that of all Japanese naval bases combined. The San Francisco Bay was encircled by military installations, each one larger than anything Japan could boast. In Los Angeles, Yamamoto witnessed the birth of the very aviation industry that would ultimately seal Japan's doom. The Douglas Aircraft Company, founded just 6 years earlier, was already manufacturing advanced aircraft using a revolutionary stressed skin construction method. The company employed 300 engineers who were experimenting with designs that would not reach Japan for another decade. But it was the oil fields of Southern California that left the most indelible impression on Yamamoto. The Los Angeles basin was home to more than 20 major oil fields. Signal Hill alone boasted 265 wells, packed so tightly together they resembled a forest of steel trees. California was producing 230 million barrels of oil annually, more than Japan would consume in 5 years of war. The ports presented yet another facet of this overwhelming power. San Pedro and Long Beach were undergoing rapid expansion, equipped with electric cranes and automated loading systems. A single berth could load more cargo in a day than the entire port of Tokyo handled in a week. The infrastructure for projecting immense power across the vast expanse of the Pacific was already firmly in place. Upon his return to Japan in March 1928, Yamamoto delivered a 200-page report on American capabilities that should have extinguished any consideration of war. His conclusions were brutally stark. American manufacturing outstripped Japan's by a factor of 10 to 20 in every single critical category. American oil production was 100 times Japan's consumption. American steel production was 12 times greater than Japan's. American automobile production was a clear demonstration of a mass production capability that could be instantaneously repurposed for military use. American aviation was advancing at such a blistering pace that Japan could never hope to catch up. The report was stamped as classified, filed away, and for the most part ignored. The Navy Ministry fixated on the sections detailing American naval construction, while dismissing the industrial analysis as being outside the purview of naval concerns. The Army, busy planning its expansion into China, had no interest in Yamamoto's dire warnings about American power. Yamamoto found himself becoming increasingly isolated. His American experience, rather than being seen as a valuable asset, made him an object of suspicion. He was too Americanized, some whispered behind his back. His habits, drinking coffee instead of tea, smoking Lucky Strikes, reading American magazines, marked him as someone contaminated by foreign influence. Nevertheless, Yamamoto persisted with his warnings. In lecture after lecture, article after article, he relentlessly hammered home the same unyielding message. Japan could not defeat America in a prolonged war. The industrial disparity was not merely quantitative, it was qualitative. America had engineered a system of innovation and production that was in a state of continuous improvement. Japan, with its constrained resources and rigid social structure, could not hope to match this dynamism. By 1939, Yamamoto's staunch opposition to a war with America had made him an assassination target for ultranationalist army officers. The same extremist groups that had murdered moderate politicians now set their sights on the admiral who insisted that Japan could not win a war against the United States. The threat became so grave that Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, who shared Yamamoto's views, transferred him to sea duty as the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet. The appointment, announced on August 30, 1939, was made with the explicit purpose of saving Yamamoto's life. At sea, he would be safe from the Army's assassins. The irony was absolute. The man most vehemently opposed to war with America was handed command of the very force that would be compelled to fight it. Yamamoto understood the cruel logic of the situation. If war was to come, Japan needed its most brilliant strategist at the helm of the fleet, even if that strategist believed the war was unwinnable from the start. "I have been given command of the combined fleet," he wrote to his friend, Shigeru Yoshida. "It is like being asked to perform surgery on a patient who insists on committing suicide. I can perhaps delay the agony, but I cannot prevent the death." His opposition never faltered. In September 1940, as the tripartite pact with Germany and Italy was being debated, Yamamoto cautioned that it would lead inevitably to war with America. To Prince Konoe, he was blunt. "If we fight the Americans, I can give you 1 year. After that, I guarantee nothing." In October 1940, to Navy Minister Admiral Koshiro Oikawa, he was even more specific. "If I am ordered to fight, I shall do my utmost for 6 months. I shall run wild considerably for the first half year, but I have utterly no confidence for the second or third year." The supreme irony of Yamamoto's career manifested in January 1941 when he commenced planning the attack on Pearl Harbor. The man who knew Japan could not win was now charged with devising a way to win. His solution was rooted entirely in his American experience. Yamamoto knew that America's vulnerability was psychological, not material. Americans, secure within their continental fortress, did not anticipate an attack. Their very strength fostered a dangerous complacency. A devastating first strike, he reasoned, might shock them into negotiations before their economic might could be fully mobilized. The plan was an act of desperation because the situation was desperate. Japan needed to neutralize the American Pacific Fleet before it could interfere with its military operations in Southeast Asia. More importantly, Japan needed to convince America that fighting a war would be too costly. Yet, even as he meticulously planned the attack, Yamamoto knew it was destined to fail. Not the attack itself, for he was confident his pilots could lay waste to Pearl Harbor, but the ultimate strategic goal. The failure would come in the aftermath, when America's colossal manufacturing power pivoted to war production. He had stood in the very factories that would produce the weapons. He had calculated the oil reserves that would fuel the inevitable counterattack. He had witnessed firsthand the mass production techniques that would construct entire fleets of ships and planes. The Pearl Harbor attack would be a tactical triumph and a strategic catastrophe, exactly as he had foreseen. As 1941 wore on and war became an unavoidable reality, Yamamoto's warnings grew more desperate and specific. To his staff officers, who were celebrating Japan's military prowess, he offered a dose of sobering mathematics. America has 500,000 tons of oil in reserve for every ton Japan possesses. They produce 500 times more steel. Their factories can retool in weeks to produce weapons. We have already lost this war. We simply haven't started fighting it yet. In September 1941, while addressing the graduating class at his alma mater in Nagaoka, Yamamoto delivered what was perhaps his most poignant warning. Most people think Americans love luxury, and that their culture is shallow and meaningless. It is a mistake to regard the Americans as luxury-loving and weak. I can tell you that they are full of spirit, adventure, and fight. Their thinking is scientific and well advanced. Lindbergh's solo crossing of the Atlantic is the sort of valiant act which is normal for them. He continued, "Do not forget that American industry is much more developed than ours, and unlike us, they have all the oil they want. Japan cannot beat America. Therefore, Japan should not fight America. The young graduates sat in a state of stunned silence. Here was one of Japan's most celebrated admirals telling them their country would lose a war it seemed determined to start. To his mistress, Chiyoko Kawai, he was even more direct in his letters. The government has been lying to the people. They speak of America as weak and divided. I have been there. I have observed their strength. We are insects declaring war on a dragon. The attack on Pearl Harbor was successful beyond all expectations. 8 battleships were damaged or sunk. 188 aircraft were destroyed. 2,403 Americans were killed. The losses for the combined fleet were minimal. 29 aircraft, 5 midget submarines, 64 men killed. Across Japan, crowds erupted in celebration in the streets. The emperor's announcement of war was met with roaring cheers of "Banzai!" At last, Japan had shown the arrogant Americans their place. The white colonialists would be driven from Asia. Aboard his flagship, the Nagato, anchored in Hiroshima Bay, Yamamoto received the reports in stoic silence. When his staff broke out sake to celebrate the victory, he retired to his cabin. Chief of Staff Admiral Matome Ugaki found him there hours later, staring intently at charts of the Pacific. Years later, Hollywood would attribute to Yamamoto the famous words about awakening a sleeping giant, a phrase he never actually uttered. His real documented words to a visitor were more precise and less poetic. A military man can scarcely pride himself on having smitten a sleeping enemy. I would rather you made your appraisal after seeing what the enemy does, since it is certain that, angered and outraged, he will soon launch a determined counterattack. The failure to destroy the American aircraft carriers was a concern to him, but not as much as the failure to destroy the oil storage tanks and repair facilities. Yamamoto understood from his visits to American ports just how rapidly they could rebuild. The damage appeared devastating, but it was, in fact, superficial. More troubling was the diplomatic blunder that had rendered the attack a complete surprise. Yamamoto had insisted that the attack must follow a formal declaration of war. Incompetence at the Japanese embassy had prevented this. Americans would now view Pearl Harbor as a treacherous sneak attack, ensuring that any possibility of a negotiated peace was gone. I had hoped to fight a war of honor, he confided to Ugaki. Instead, we have guaranteed our own destruction through dishonor. Precisely as Yamamoto had predicted, Japan ran wild for half a year. The combined fleet swept across the Pacific, crushing Allied forces with breathtaking efficiency. Singapore fell. The Philippines fell. The Dutch East Indies fell. By May 1942, Japan held dominion over an empire that stretched from the borders of India to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But Yamamoto took no pleasure in these victories. He understood them to be mere illusions, possible only because America had not yet fully mobilized its industrial might. In his cabin, he maintained charts that tracked American ship construction. The numbers were terrifying. In the first 6 months of 1942, American shipyards launched 2 aircraft carriers, 4 cruisers, 23 destroyers, and 26 submarines. And this was only the beginning. Yamamoto knew from his visits to American shipyards that they were still in the process of retooling. Once they were fully operational, they would produce ships faster than Japan could possibly sink them. The oil situation was even more dire. Despite capturing the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, Japan's production could not even begin to compare with America's. America produced more oil in a single month than Japan's captured fields could produce in an entire year. And American synthetic rubber production, a technology Yamamoto had studied back in 1926, meant that they didn't even need the rubber plantations of Asia. "We are like children who have stolen candy," he remarked to his operations officer. "We celebrate while the adult prepares his punishment." The Battle of Midway commenced on June 4, 1942, almost exactly 6 months to the day after Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto's prophecy was about to be fulfilled with mathematical precision. The plan was complex, perhaps overly so, a reflection of Yamamoto's growing desperation. He understood that this might be Japan's final opportunity to destroy the American carriers before overwhelming reinforcements began to arrive. The intelligence he had received indicated that America had, at most, 2 operational carriers in the Pacific. In reality, they had 3, plus the decisive advantage of having broken the Japanese naval codes. The disaster unfolded with the kind of grim inevitability that Yamamoto had long foreseen. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were sunk in a single catastrophic day. These were irreplaceable losses. Japan possessed neither the production capability nor the pool of trained pilots to recover from such a devastating blow. Aboard the battleship Yamato, positioned 300 miles behind the carrier force, Yamamoto received the reports in somber silence. When informed that all 4 carriers were lost, he simply nodded. Staff officers would later recount that he seemed almost relieved, as if a long-expected burden had finally arrived. "The American giant is now fully awake," he informed his staff. "From this moment on, we fight only to delay the inevitable." The numbers proved him correct. In the 18 months following Midway, America would launch 17 fleet carriers and 76 escort carriers. Japan, in total, would launch only 6 more fleet carriers for the remainder of the war. The industrial equation that Yamamoto had calculated in the halls of Harvard was playing out exactly as he had predicted. After Midway, American production statistics surged to levels that would have seemed fantastical, even to Yamamoto's most pessimistic calculations. The industrial colossus hadn't just awakened. It had transformed into a force of nature. By 1943, American factories were producing 1 aircraft every 5 minutes, 1 merchant ship every day, 1 aircraft carrier every month, 150 tanks daily, and 500,000 military trucks annually. The Ford Willow Run plant alone, which hadn't even existed when Yamamoto visited Detroit, was producing B-24 bombers at a rate of 1 every 63 minutes. The entire facility had been constructed in just 9 months, a shorter time than it took Japan to build a single factory. Yamamoto received these intelligence reports with a sense of grim satisfaction. Everything he had predicted was coming true, only faster and more overwhelmingly than even he had imagined. The assembly lines he had studied in Detroit were now churning out the instruments of Japan's destruction. The oil situation was catastrophic. America was producing 1.7 billion barrels of oil annually by 1943. Japan's entire strategic reserve was a mere 50 million barrels and was shrinking by the day. American submarines, produced at a rate Japan could not hope to match, were systematically strangling Japanese oil shipments from Southeast Asia. "I told them about the oil," Yamamoto wrote in his private diary. "I showed them the numbers. They chose not to believe. Now our ships sit in port for lack of fuel, while American task forces roam the seas at will." Throughout 1942 and into early 1943, Yamamoto commanded the combined fleet with the full, crushing knowledge of inevitable defeat. His letters to Chiyoko Kawai, discovered after the war, reveal a man haunted by his own foresight. "I am like a doctor treating a patient I have already diagnosed as terminal. I can ease some symptoms, delay the final moment, but I cannot change the outcome. The disease is industrial inferiority, and it is fatal." His staff observed his increasing fatalism. He began to take greater risks, exposing himself to danger unnecessarily. During an inspection tour of forward bases, he insisted on visiting the most perilous positions, as if he were courting the death that would release him from the burden of commanding a doomed fleet. Admiral Ugaki wrote in his diary, "The commander-in-chief seems to welcome danger. He understands something we refuse to acknowledge, that we have already lost. His burden is not command, but prophecy fulfilled." Yamamoto's final strategic assessment, penned in March 1943, was stark. "America has replaced every ship lost at Pearl Harbor twice over. They have trained more pilots in 1 year than Japan has trained in 20. Their production increases monthly while ours declines. Mathematics, not courage, determines victory. The mathematics doom us." American codebreakers intercepted Yamamoto's travel itinerary on April 14, 1943. He was scheduled to inspect forward bases in the Solomon Islands, flying from Rabaul to Balalai Island on April 18. The schedule was precise down to the minute, a hallmark of Yamamoto's meticulous attention to detail. Operation Vengeance was approved at the very highest levels. Admiral Chester Nimitz questioned whether it was worth revealing America's code-breaking capabilities. The answer was a resounding yes. Yamamoto was irreplaceable, not just as a strategist, but as the only Japanese leader who truly comprehended American capabilities. 18 P-38. Lightning fighters were dispatched from Guadalcanal, flying at wave-top height to evade radar detection. The mission demanded precise navigation over 435 miles of open ocean, with the goal of arriving at the exact minute Yamamoto's plane would be approaching Bougainville. The technology that ultimately killed Yamamoto was the very embodiment of everything he had warned about. The P-38s were products of American mass production, powered by Allison engines that each produced 1,600 horsepower, burning high-octane fuel from Texas refineries. Their navigation was perfect, their timing precise, their execution flawless. At 9:34 a.m., Yamamoto's Mitsubishi G4M bomber was shot down over the dense jungle of Bougainville. The man who had experienced America's manufacturing power firsthand was killed by its products. Advanced fighters guided by code-breaking technology that Japan could not match. His body was discovered the following day, still strapped to his seat, his hand resting on his sword. In his coat pocket was a poem he had written just days earlier. "I have seen the future, and it belongs to those who build, not those who destroy." Yamamoto's death removed the one Japanese leader who genuinely understood the hopelessness of Japan's position. His successor, Admiral Minachi Koga, lacked both Yamamoto's strategic vision and his first-hand knowledge of American capabilities. The prophecy Yamamoto had made in 1940, 6 months to a year of victories, followed by inevitable defeat, proved to be precisely accurate. Every prediction he had made based on his American observations came true. American production overwhelmed Japanese forces exactly as he had calculated. American oil resources proved to be limitless while Japan's dwindled to nothing. American technology, particularly radar and code-breaking, provided decisive advantages. American mass production techniques allowed for the rapid replacement of losses. American industrial conversion from civilian to military production exceeded even his most dire warnings. By 1944, America was producing more war materials in a single month than Japan produced in an entire year. The factories Yamamoto had visited in the 1920s were now operating at levels that defied comprehension. The River Rouge plant alone was producing more military vehicles than all of Japan's factories combined. August 1945 brought the ultimate validation of Yamamoto's warnings. The atomic bombs that annihilated Hiroshima and Nagasaki were products of an American industrial and scientific capability that even Yamamoto had not fully foreseen, though he had consistently warned about American technological superiority. The Manhattan Project had cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire military budget for the war. It employed 130,000 workers, used more electricity than entire Japanese cities, and required a level of industrial precision that Japan could not achieve. The bombs were delivered by B-29 superfortresses, each one costing more than a Japanese destroyer, produced in quantities that Japan could not match. Captain Ellis Zacharias, Yamamoto's poker partner from his Washington days, broadcast a message to Japan in Japanese, reminding the listeners of Yamamoto's warnings. "Your Admiral Yamamoto knew this day would come. He observed our factories, our oil fields, our laboratories. He tried to warn you. You chose not to listen." The final statistics of the war vindicated every single calculation Yamamoto had made. Production comparison from 1941 to 1945. Aircraft, USA 300,000, Japan 76,320. Aircraft carriers, USA 141, Japan 16. Battleships, USA 8, Japan 2. Submarines, USA 203, Japan 126. Merchant shipping, USA 93,232 tons, Japan 4,152,361 tons. These were not just numbers. They were the mathematical proof of what Yamamoto had witnessed directly. An industrial colossus that, once aroused, could not be defeated by any island nation dependent on imported resources. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces uncovered Yamamoto's private papers, including letters that were never sent and diaries never intended for publication. These documents laid bare the full extent of his foreknowledge and his despair. In an unsent letter to Emperor Hirohito, dated December 1, 1941, Yamamoto had written, "Your Majesty, I have failed in my duty to prevent this war. Having experienced America's strength directly, I know we cannot prevail. Their factories can produce unlimited weapons. Their oil fields can fuel unlimited operations. Their people, once aroused, will not stop until victory is complete. I can give Your Majesty half a year of victories. After that, mathematics takes over. We are 70 million people with no resources fighting 130 million people with unlimited resources. The outcome is predetermined." Another letter, addressed to his likely successor, Admiral Koga, was written just days before his death. "You will inherit a fleet that is doomed. Not by a lack of courage or skill, but by industrial mathematics. Every ship you lose, they will replace with 3. Every plane destroyed, they will replace with 10. Every gallon of fuel burned brings us closer to immobility, while they swim in oceans of oil. I have witnessed their production directly. We fight not a nation, but a continental industrial machine. Hold out as long as honor demands, but know that defeat is certain." The supreme irony of Yamamoto's story lies not in his death, but in his life. The man who best understood America's power was forced to lead the war against it. The admiral, who knew Japan would lose, had to plan the very attack that guaranteed that loss. The prophet who warned against awakening the giant had to deliver the awakening blow. His Harvard classmates, upon learning of his role in Pearl Harbor, expressed profound shock. Professor Theodore McNally, who had taught Yamamoto economics, said, "He knew better than anyone that Japan couldn't win. He observed our steel mills, our oil wells, our assembly lines. He understood mass production. For him to have planned Pearl Harbor must have been an agony." But Yamamoto had no choice. In the rigid hierarchy of Imperial Japan, refusal meant not just personal disgrace, but an abandonment of his duty to minimize the catastrophe he saw coming. He could not prevent the war, but perhaps he could shorten it through initial victories that might lead to a negotiated peace. Japanese military historians, studying Yamamoto's warnings after the war, finally realized the full magnitude of their own blindness. Every prediction he had made proved accurate, every warning validated by the course of events. Admiral Somu Toyoda, who commanded the fleet in the war's final stages, admitted, "Yamamoto saw what we refused to see. He had been to America. He knew their capacity. We dismissed his warnings as defeatism. We believed our spirit could overcome their material advantage. He knew spirit could not overcome mathematics." General Hideki Tojo, the prime minister who had pushed for war, stated, at his war crimes trial, "Admiral Yamamoto told us we could not win. He had studied in America. He knew their industry. We thought he was too influenced by Western thinking. We were wrong. He was simply telling the truth." The tragedy extended beyond individual blindness. Japan's entire military establishment had ignored the one man who had actually studied their enemy's capabilities. They preferred comfortable illusions to uncomfortable facts. They chose mystical beliefs about Japanese superiority over the empirical evidence of American strength. Paradoxically, Yamamoto was more respected by his enemies than by his own government. American naval officers who had known him expressed genuine regret at his death, even while celebrating the tactical success. Admiral Chester Nimitz, who had ordered Operation Vengeance, later said, "Yamamoto was the only Japanese leader who truly understood American power. He had observed our country, studied our industry, knew our psychology." His death was necessary but tragic. He was a man who knew the truth and was forced to act against it. Ellis Zacharias, his poker companion from the 1920s, wrote a remarkable epitaph. Yamamoto was a prophet without honor in his own country. He witnessed our economic strength and warned against challenging it. He understood that modern war is won in factories, not on battlefields. His tragedy was being too perceptive in a culture that valued conformity over truth. Captain Edwin Layton, who had helped break the Japanese codes, reflected, "We killed the one Japanese leader who might have shortened the war." He knew Japan had lost before it began. With him gone, Japanese leadership passed to men who believed their own propaganda. The war dragged on for 2 more bloody years. Declassified documents in the 1970s revealed the full extent of Yamamoto's American intelligence gathering. His reports from the 1920s showed remarkably accurate predictions of American wartime production. He had correctly estimated American aircraft production capacity to within 10% of its actual wartime peak, oil production within 5% of wartime output, steel production within 15% of wartime levels, and shipbuilding capacity within 20% of actual production. His methodology was meticulous. He had counted factory floor space, calculated worker productivity, measured supply chain efficiency, and extrapolated wartime potential. His calculations, done with slide rules and notebooks, proved more accurate than many computer projections today. Most remarkably, he had predicted the psychological impact of Pearl Harbor. In a 1940 memo, he wrote, "A surprise attack on Pearl Harbor would tactically succeed but strategically fail. Americans would unite in rage. Their industrial power, fully mobilized by anger, would be unstoppable." Yamamoto's story transcends its historical moment. It is fundamentally about the danger of wishful thinking when confronting mathematical reality. He had witnessed the numbers, observed the production, and calculated the outcome. His tragedy was that no one wanted to hear the truth. In his final letter to Chiyoko Kawai, written just days before his death, Yamamoto achieved a kind of peace. "I have done my duty as I understood it. I warned them based on what I had witnessed. I told them about the factories, the oil, the endless production. They chose war anyway. I led their fleet knowing we would lose, hoping only to make the defeat less catastrophic. History will judge whether I was right to serve a cause I knew was doomed. But I could not abandon my country, even when my country abandoned reason." The letter concluded with a haiku that captured his entire journey. "Spring rain in Texas, I saw iron become doom. Math defeats courage." Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto died knowing every prediction he had made would come true. The 6 months of victories he promised lasted exactly from December 7, 1941 to June 4, 1942. The industrial tsunami he had warned about materialized with mathematical precision. The giant he feared to awaken arose with exactly the terrible resolve he had predicted. His years in America, at Harvard studying petroleum, in Detroit observing assembly lines, in Texas counting oil derricks, in Washington measuring economic capacity, had given him perfect foresight. He witnessed not just America's present strength, but its latent potential. He understood that modern war was won by production statistics, not warrior spirit. The American factories he had visited as a student and attaché became the arsenals that crushed the empire he served. The oil fields he had studied fueled the fleets that destroyed his navy. The assembly lines he had witnessed produced the aircraft that burned Japanese cities. Every notebook he had filled with observations became a prophecy of doom fulfilled. Yet Yamamoto's story is not ultimately about defeat, but about the courage to speak truth to power, even when that truth is unwelcome. He experienced what others refused to see, calculated what others refused to count, and warned what others refused to hear. His tragedy was not that he was wrong, but that he was absolutely right. In the end, Admiral Yamamoto's American education taught him the most bitter lesson of all, that in modern industrial warfare, mathematics is destiny. He had done the math, witnessed the factors, calculated the outcome. Japan would have 6 months to run wild, then face inevitable defeat from an aroused industrial giant. He was right, to the very day. The man who spent years in America warning that Japan would lose in 6 months became history's most tragic prophet, condemned to lead a war he knew was lost before the first shot was fired, killed by the very American technology he had warned would prove decisive, and vindicated only in the ashes of his nation's defeat. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had experienced America, and he knew.